Callaway Paradym drivers are here, but how well do they perform? Let's go find out. So there are 3 new drivers from Callaway in the Paradym range this year. The straight up Paradym, which sits like in the middle of the range, and that's probably going to be the club that suits the most people. Then on the other extreme, we've got the triple diamond. This is like the smallest, it's like that low spin offering, very tour player inspired. I can't get over how good this looks. Like, look at the colourways, look at the little rose gold weightings. I love it. And then finally we've got the Paradym X, which is more of like that kind of higher forgiving model, possibly a little bit of draw bias. So this is the furthest extreme from the triple diamond. Now we'd expect this to go kind of higher, have more spin, be a little bit more forgiving, and then on this extreme this is going to be like the least forgiving, lowest spin, lowest launch. Okay. Now what I love about this is the kind of textures you've got on the sole. So can you see how there's kind of like this, like, I don't even know how to describe it, it's almost like a camouflage pattern, and that's because the bottom of this club is forged carbon, which is brand new. Like, I don't think anyone's done that before, and it's where instead of taking sheets of carbon like you have on the top here and like you have in most situations on a golf club, you kind of get these like bunched up little fibers and then you forge them into place, and that's how you can get this like one piece, like textured different shaping on the sole. And that makes this super lightweight in the middle section of the club. So this whole wraparound is carbon. This is forged carbon on the bottom. This is kind of the normal carbon we would see in a driver on the top. So they're 2 different ones, but it means there's no titanium in this section at all. So we can save so much weight and get that in the back and on the perimeters to help with MOI, excellent for forgiveness. So boost in those areas where you really want the weight. So I guess let's see how it performs. I'm gonna start with the regular Paradym. Now, there's actually only 3 of these in the country so far. We've literally had to drive like 2 hours to test this. So we've got a 10.5 head. That's definitely not optimal for how high I hit the golf ball. So I've lofted it down 1 degree. That's the lowest I can get it. We are going to compare this to last year's Rogue a bit later on in the video, but they're probably going to be different lofts. So just bear that in mind. Now, one thing that's really interesting about this is we've got the weight track on the back. Because there's so much weight saved here, we can have more weight back here and we can have more adjustability. I'm going to just leave this in the middle setting because I don't really want any excessive draw or fade bias, but if you did, you can move that across, and that's 15 grams, so you're going to get a decent amount of shot shape correction on that, probably like 10 to 15 yards. It sits so nice behind the golf ball. Now, because I've lofted it down, that's opened the club face up a little bit. So when you're moving stuff around in the hosel, you need to be kind of aware of that. So this probably looks slightly open, but it still sits really nice behind the golf ball. We've got this like new alignment feature on the top of the club head this year, which really frames like the golf ball nicely. I think that's very tour player inspired. They like to have something on the front to kind of frame the ball. You can see we've got the little Callaway logo as well. Interestingly, it's not on the triple diamond. I love the fact this is like a smaller shape. In last year, a lot of the Rogues were really long and elongated, and they looked quite big behind the golf ball. It's probably the only thing I didn't really like about them. So I really love the fact they've been able to make it smaller this year. Feels really nice. Definitely sounds slightly more high-pitched than last year's, I would say. I actually don't mind that at all. Launch pretty high, I mean that's to be expected. It's a 10.5 degree head. Launch angle 17.5 degrees. Carry 221. Pretty good from only 93 club head speed. What I like about this though is I feel like I can hit it and still really like control the dispersion. So I've hit this before on the range as well, not just out on the course. And it's like a lot of drivers, you feel like if you go after it, you lose that dispersion. With this, what I found so far is it's been really consistent. That carried 236.5 as well, which is nice. Could get used to that. Now, so far, this seems more forgiving than last year's model. And you might wonder how they've done like that. This is a smaller club head and it's more forgiving. And those are kind of like 2 opposite things that you wouldn't expect to happen. Some of that comes down to the construction. Because it's lighter in this middle section, they've saved weight that they can move to the edges, and more weight on the edges means something's more forgiving. Also, it comes down to the club face, which they've actually used AI and said, we want this to be better in terms of dispersion downrange, which is kind of mental, but so far it seems to be working. The dispersion's really good, but it's very neutral maybe even slightly right. Obviously, I have opened the club face up a little bit. I hate to see a golf ball like really turn over and go too far left, and I don't feel like I can do that with this, which is definitely pretty nice. It just goes so straight. I thought it was just dialed in on the range, but it's even going straight on the golf course, which is quite nice. Okay, let's have a look at some averages. So overall, I'd say that data is pretty much where I'd expect it to be. My best shot flew 236.5, which is pretty nice, and it was dead straight down the middle. But the average ended up at 228. Now, it is literally 5 degrees in England, so I'd probably get a little bit more out of that in summer, but I think in terms of averages and carry distance, that was all pretty good. But what I like is there's really not much variation at all in terms of like front to back. The shortest carry on there is 221, so even your bad strike is pretty good in terms of distance. Like 15 yards front to back is not massive at all for a driver. And also like the left right dispersion is pretty good. I mean, my furthest left shot was 10 yards, which was a bit of a pull, and the furthest right one was 20 yards. So like 30 yard left to right, I'd be very happy with that on the golf course. Now, in terms of the other stuff, spin was pretty damn good to say this is not fitted at all, like mid 2300s. Launch, perhaps a little bit high, 15 degrees, but not terrible. And the club head speed was 94, which I suspect will probably be a little bit quicker than what we see with the Rogue later on. I mean, I have got like 5 layers on, so not the quickest I can be, but not bad. Right, let's go hit the triple diamond because I just love the way it looks. And let's see what the differences are. See if it's as hard to hit as you think it would be for like a tour players club. Right, this is a 9-degree head, so I'm just going to hit this on standard because I don't think we need to take any more loft off this. Now, in terms of like tech here, this is a slightly smaller club head. Over the ball, it's a little bit deeper and like more rounded, which I think is really nice. There also isn't this little like Callaway logo on the front for alignment. I just think it looks so clean behind the golf ball. Like, I just will be amazed if there's a better looking driver this year because this looks incredible. Now, the whole point of this is it launches lower, it has lower spin, it's more workable. So you've got different weights you can use here. If you really wanted to lower the spin, you could take this like 14 gram weight and put it in the front. I don't think I need the spin that low, so I put it in the back, which is going to give me a little bit extra spin. But you can get it really forward if you want to really bring that spin down. This feels so good on a centre strike. Like, the ball flight is really high, regardless. I mean, I hit it high, so it helps. But you'd think it was going to come out really low. The spin on that was 2.4, so actually slightly higher than the regular one, but the carry was 2.32, so definitely a little bit longer with identical club head speed. I actually think this performs really nicely with that weight at the back, because I think unless you're someone who spins it like loads, having it in the front makes it very low spinning and a little bit unplayable, but that option to be able to switch these around, it almost kind of creates 2 drivers in one, which is pretty good. Now, what I would say with my testing so far from this is the carry distance isn't quite as consistent with this. I can get bigger carry distance in terms of the best shot, but the front to back is probably a little bit bigger because on off-centre strikes it's just not quite as forgiving. When you hit it good though, it's just so nice. But there's definitely a little bit, probably too much variance for me. I mean, it's designed for John Rahm, not me. In terms of launch angle, this is good though. It's like down at 13.5, which for me is a lot lower than normal. One thing that's noticeable is this feels a little harsher off the face. Like, it feels a little firmer and not kind of as fast as the other model, which is weird given this is faster on like your best shots. Right, last up, Paradym X. This is also a 10.5, so I've lofted this down 1 degree. I think this is going to go very high because there is more weight in the back of this. Like, the whole point of this is it's more forgiving, so it's easier to launch, it's easier to kind of get distance, it's easier to be forgiving. Now, straight away with this, you can see the club head is a lot bigger. It's a lot more like elongated and stretched this way, and the reason for that is you can get more weight on the perimeter, more weight further away, which is going to give you that MOM forgiveness. Now, it also means there's a lot more weight at the back of the club, So I think the ball's gonna go like this. It does look a lot bigger actually. Probably my least favourite of the three, but it's not really designed for me. That one's so high. Launch angle, 18.6. 118 feet. That is high. Spun 3000, which is also, obviously it's too much, but if you have a club that has too much loft on it, it's gonna spin more. So that spin rate is higher than we would see if I was using the 9 degree, which is what I would normally use. Still carried 221 though, which really isn't bad in terms of distance. Like you think with that spin and that height, it wouldn't end up getting that far. If you hit the ball too low, you definitely need to hit this driver, because I think it's impossible to hit this club low. I think the big thing with this is it just feels really easy to hit and like get down in the fairway somewhere. Like the launch is so easy. The distance is probably not as long as some of the other models, but it's pretty consistent. I think if you're someone who hits it really low and suddenly use something with tech-in like this that launch the ball higher, you're gonna get extra distance like relative to what you're used to. I already have height, so it might not affect like my total carry distance in the same way. I mean, when you hit that good, it goes. Almost goes as high as it goes down the fairway. Ball speed 136, height 121 feet. But 225 carry distance with 8000 spin. So like, if I went for a fit-in and got that spin down a little bit, got a lower lofted head, like you could really optimize this. I think for someone who like maybe doesn't like hitting driver, hits it very low, wants something that goes a lot higher, this is like super helpful. I think the big thing is it just feels really easy to hit. Like it's almost like a game improvement club, but in a very close to like players club shaping, which I think is really nice. So we've hit all three of the new Paradym drivers now. I'm gonna go back and hit the Rogue ST. Now obviously last year we had 4 models, this year we've got 3, so they don't all match up in terms of having like exactly the same name, but I've got the Max here, which is what I was fitted into last year. I think that's probably gonna be pretty similar to the Paradym, maybe slightly between the Paradym and the Paradym X. It's definitely bigger in terms of kind of shape than the Paradym. So let's see what the difference in terms of performance is. I've put the same shaft in this, but this is in a 9 degree head, so there is going to be a little bit of difference because of that. Now obviously I haven't had to loft this head down compared to this year. I've obviously taken that 10.5 and knocked a degree off. So this looks like it sits square, but that's just because of that difference in kind of loft models. It's definitely bigger though, it's a lot more elongated at the back. It'll be interesting to see what the forgiveness is like because of that. Still a nice shot, slightly right. Definitely not in the fairway. 226 carry, pretty much in the middle of the bunch from the other drivers I've hit already. Spin's quite a bit lower actually, which is interesting. That was under 2100. Launch angle 15, so fairly similar number to what we saw with the new one, to be fair. It's gone a long way left. I feel like the biggest change here is in terms of the visual though, because like, look how different those crowns look. This is so much smaller, and for me personally, last year, although I loved the performance of this, I felt like it was quite big, and like when you're trying to move it in space, like you couldn't really speed up the club head that well. So like having something smaller, 1, you can move it quicker through space, but 2, like it just looks nice to me behind the golf ball. I don't know if that would vary for different people. Maybe if you're a higher handicap, maybe you like a bigger club head, maybe it's more comforting, but personally I feel like the smaller shape just feels like it's more of a better player's club, and that you can like get that movement and speed with it. Now obviously the other big thing is we don't have that like new alignment aid on the front, so the whole of this club head is more like seamless. I think I do like that new front and how it kind of forced you to focus and aim better. That felt nice. This feels a lot more draw biased. Like I feel like I'm turning a lot more over, which I really wasn't doing with the other ones. That was long as well. It's carried 233, 140 ball speed, 2-3 spin, all pretty optimal. Oh my god, I hit that so far out the toe. Has gone in the middle of the fairway though. Probably not gone very far. Yeah, 214 carry. Best. It's quite interesting actually. They've obviously done a lot of work with the club face this year in terms of that AI, and you can tell the feel is different. I can't describe it exactly, but there is a big difference in terms of feel between the two. This is coming out a bit lower, but obviously it's a lower lofted head, so you kind of would expect that. I'd say the big thing that seems interesting here is, for me, I feel like on my good one, the distance is really good with this. That was a bit low on the face, so the carry wasn't great. But overall, if you kind of look at the comparison between the different clubs, this one feels like a lot more inconsistent. One, in terms of launch angle, and two, in terms of dispersion. Because with the other one, I would say this is more draw biased. I felt like there was more left bias to my dispersion and I could hit more shots left. With the Paradym straight up, it felt like it was straighter or slightly, maybe slightly to the right, but the dispersion was a lot tighter, which is pretty interesting. And even tighter again if we move into the X model. So my best shot with this, I would say, I feel like it felt a little bit nicer than it did with the Paradym, and that flew 233, so that was really good. But some of my worst strikes were a lot worse. So I think maybe your best shot is pretty similar across both models, but what you're actually seeing is that worst shot is being brought up, so your carry distance is better and also your dispersion is tighter. Which, if you actually go back to the tech story of the Paradym, the whole point is, one of the big things they've done is change the face. So all these are designed by AI using the supercomputer, and they can tell it different information. So they can say, we want to increase the ball speed by this, we want the spin to be this. And they've done that over the years, but this year it's the first time that they've programmed it to improve your downrange dispersion. So they're saying, when the ball is down there, we don't want it to do this, we want it to do this. And you think, how can they do that? They do that by texturing the back of the club head. But you think that's not going to work, but it has. It's definitely more like that, isn't it? I didn't really hit anything like that with the other one. That's what I mean about when I say people get annoyed that people bring new drivers out, but like stuff always does things differently. So like maybe if you wanted something really draw biased, you're best sticking with this one. But you might be someone that hates a club that goes left, so this is not good, and you're actually better moving into a new one that's like more neutral or even kind of slightly fade biased in terms of like the triple diamond. Right, so let's take a look at the data for all four clubs now. It's pretty interesting. It's probably like quite similar to what I would have expected. So the Paradym triple diamond on average was actually the longest at 229, and it had like tied one of the longest shots up at 236, but you can see there's a lot more like long balls consistently, but also the dispersion is wider. Like, I really loved the performance of this club on a good shot. It was very optimized, but you kind of have to hit good shots with it. It's not really designed for like off-center strikes, because the tour players who it's designed for don't hit as many as those. So like in terms of feel, you could really notice that drop off when you hit it off center, and also in terms of like shot shape and just like keeping the dispersion in. But actually in terms of front to back dispersion, it wasn't terrible. It wasn't as good as the others, but it was only like 20 yards, which isn't disastrous. Now, the next longest was the Paradym, and weirdly I swung this like half a mile an hour faster on average than the other. I think that's just because I felt a little bit more comfortable with this, and like it's more suited to me in terms of it's a little bit more forgiving. So I felt like I could swing it a bit more than I could with the triple diamond, because what's weird with this is you don't feel this often with the driver, but I felt like I could just hit it and try and hit it hard, and the dispersion was like the same as if I'd like just swung it soft. So that's definitely pretty nice, and probably like the biggest key to this. Now, this spun about 250 RPM more than the triple diamond, which is probably what you would expect. The dispersion was tighter. The average carry distance was down a little bit at 228, a yard, not much at all. But I still did get those long shots, so I still did get one out at 236, 2.5, which is good, and a couple more in the 230s. So the distance on average was pretty good. The front to back dispersion was a lot better. So my worst carry distance on this was 221. So in terms of front to back, 15 yards. So about 5 yards better than the other model. And also in terms of like left to right dispersion, we're talking like easy 15 yards better. So the worst shot on either side was only 20 yards from the centre line. So 40-yard width. It's pretty good. And that's like a mixture of range testing and on course. Now, lastly, the Paradym X. Key highlights here, it goes really high. In terms of averages, it averaged 224. So, you know, not excessively shorter than the other ones, really. And your good shots were still kind of up there in like the 230s, which is pretty good. Now, I would say in terms of left to right dispersion, it probably wasn't quite as forgiving as I would have like expected. You can see the Paradym is actually the smallest, and I expected the X might be better, but in terms of front to back, it was the most consistent. So the front to back dispersion was like 5 yards better, but the left to right wasn't as good. I think some of that probably comes down to the fact I was spinning it so much, it was going so high, and didn't feel quite as comfortable with it. But what I liked about this is just easy to hit. Like if you're someone who needs extra height and needs something that just feels easy to launch and get down in the fairway, this is definitely spot on. Okay, so the big question you want to know, is the Paradym better than the Rogue? So I've compared the straight up Paradym model with the Rogue ST Max. I think those are the most suited to compare against each other. Now, in terms of carry distance, there was a massive difference. No, I'm joking, there wasn't. It was 4 yards on average. So the Paradym carried 228.4 and last year's Rogue ST Max carried 223.6. So that is a decent bit of difference, really. And it's only come from an extra half a mile an hour of ball speed, which is pretty interesting. Now, I would say this year's is more optimized for what you'd want. The spin is 200 RPM lefts, which is pretty interesting given the fact I had such a high loft and I lofted it down. I definitely wouldn't have expected that. So I imagine like the actual 9-degree loft could be really low spinning. It'll be interesting to test that out when we get our hands on one. Now, in terms of launch angle, the Paradym was launching higher. We would expect that because it's a 10.5 knocked down to a 9.5, so it's not quite as low as the 9 that we had in the Rogue ST. The big difference is the difference in dispersion. The left to right dispersion of the Rogue ST is 45 yards from my testing, and with the Paradym it was only 30 yards. So look how big of a difference that is. Now, if you're someone who hits a fade, a power fade, or a slice, I would probably stick to last year's Rogue ST. I feel like that was a lot more draw bias. Yes, I did have my like Paradym lofted down, which opens the face a little bit, but still, like, the left to right difference between these is massive. You can see the Rogue ST is so much more draw biased, but it's not as consistent across the board. Like, I just felt like I could hit the Paradym. What happened then? I just felt like I could hit the Paradym like as hard as I wanted and do whatever, and it still somehow ended like in the fairway, which is a bit of a joke. Like, when does that ever happen? It doesn't. So in terms of distance, yes, it's a little bit better. It's not going to be massive because it's from 1 year to the next. You're only going to ever see incremental gains. But I think the big jump here is that AI story with improving the downrange dispersion, because this felt super consistent and it's performed that way both on the practice ground and out on the golf course, which I think is definitely a big win.